The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Susan Sweeney, one of the deans at eLearningU, and I'd like to welcome you to today's program, a very timely program. Hope you're all staying safe out there and doing all of your social distancing and helping us all get over this so that we can get back to traveling. For anybody that's new on the call, we go for about 50 minutes of great content, and then we have about 10 minutes of Q&A. We do our Q&A one of two ways. You can type your question in the question area as we go along, and then I'll read those questions out to Rohit in the Q&A time period. Alternatively, if you'd like to speak to Rohit directly to get your question answered, just wait till we're in the Q&A time period, and then click on the little hand symbol on your control panel. There's a little hand there. It lights up on my screen and tells me that you want me to unmute you so that you can speak directly to our expert. I will give you a heads up, call you by your first name. I will then unmute you. You'll be able to speak to Rohit to get your question answered. Everybody will be able to hear the question, everybody can hear the answer. And once your question's been answered to your satisfaction, I will then mute you again and we'll go on to the next question. So our expert today, Rohit Talwar, we're so happy to have you with us, Rohit. Rohit's coming to us from London, England today. So we really appreciate you being here. Rohit is a global futurist, an award-winning speaker, strategic advisor, and entrepreneur focused on delivering future insights, provoking radical thinking, and enhancing the prospects for humanity. Rohit works with global companies, entrepreneurs, investors, and governments to help them anticipate and respond to the forces and ideas shaping the future. He has a particular focus on the future of travel, tourism, hospitality, meetings, and aviation. His clients include American Express, Emirates Air, IBM, Intercontinental Hotels, Microsoft, PwC, Shell, industry associations, travel and convention bureaus, convention centers, airports, and the governments of the UAE, Singapore, the UK, and the US. Rohit has authored and edited 7 books on the emerging future and how to navigate it. His next book, Aftershocks and Opportunities, Scenarios for a Post-Pandemic Future, was published June 1st, 2020, hot off the presses. So thanks so much, Rohit, for being with us today. Really appreciate you being here and really looking forward to your program.
Well, thank you very much, Susan, for having me, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who's listening into this. I'm going to take myself off the view now so you can focus on the slides as they're much prettier than I am, and hopefully that'll work. Excellent. So let me just give you some context for this. As Susan mentioned, we spend a lot of time focusing on the emerging future, and we decided back in March that what we really wanted to do was help people around about this time think about what's next. How do we get through the next stages of the pandemic, and what might our world be like afterwards so we can plan for it. We had over 115 chapters submitted from around the world, and we took the very best of them and split them into 2 books. The first came out on the 1st of June and the second will come out in September. And what we've done since then is we've taken some of that content and we've really adapted it to focus in particular on travel, tourism, hospitality, and meetings and events. And we're just writing a paper and finalizing that now. And if you contact me afterwards, I'll leave my email address with you at the end as well. I'll more than happily send you a copy of the slides and a copy of the paper. So let's get going. Let's dive in. I think it's fair to say that we're in sectors right now that are probably the most heavily affected of all. Travel, tourism, hospitality, leisure, aviation have really been decimated by this crisis. And all of us are faced with a situation of real uncertainty about how the future will play out, how the pandemic will roll out, whether we'll see further evolutions in turning into secondary and tertiary peaks, how long the economic uncertainty will remain, what the shape of the economic recovery will look like. And so those of us who are in this sector, who are really used to being upbeat and energized by people coming to stay with us, by creating exciting propositions for them, by delivering exceptional service, we're having to think very differently about who we are, what we do, how do we move forward in this world? And we're all having to redefine what our purpose is. And that's really where we're jumping in. We want to look at, well, what are the possibilities in this uncertain world? And what we can see is there are three critical challenges now. The first is that there isn't just one scenario. There are multiple ways in which all of the factors could play out. And I'm going to talk you through some of those. So we actually have to prepare for a range of scenarios. And this, again, is an industry that likes being upbeat. So we tend to focus on preparing for the recovery scenarios. But we also now, I think, really have to think about the worst case scenarios and making sure we're well prepared for those. Secondly, we have to understand, we have to anticipate what's coming next. What are the next shifts in the marketplace? And work out how we respond to them. We can't just wait for them to happen to us. And finally, we then have to think about how do we become super flexible, super adaptable, and very experimental in the way we work, because we don't know what's going to work. We don't know what the model's going to look like. We don't know how long the windows of opportunity will be where we can have guests or host conventions before they get closed down again. So we're having to really think very differently and how we deliver a super safe experience in the windows of opportunities we might have. And so with so many different forces at play, economic, social, medical, political, there are many different ways in which they could play out. And what we found is that people struggle to try and deal with everything if you just present them with all the information. One of the best ways of making sense of it is to turn it into some scenarios, some stories about the future and how it might play out. These are not predictions. These are just different possible ways in which things can play out. And the challenge is not to pick the scenario we like best, but is to think about, well, what would we do under each and every one of these scenarios? What would we do that would work under all scenarios? And what are the things in particular that we might do in the worst case scenario that could actually benefit us then in all the other scenarios? And so we developed our scenario grid based on two critical forces, which we think are the most important, but also the most uncertain. The first is how the pandemic evolves. And you've got a spectrum here from it being poorly contained through to a global eradication of the pandemic. Because the important thing here is that this pandemic travels around the world in seat 43C of an airplane. And until we've eradicated it everywhere, we're not safe anywhere. As we've just seen in New Zealand, they called an end to the pandemic, and then two people came from Britain and reintroduced the pandemic to them. And so we know that we have to eradicate it globally if we want to be secure wherever we are in the world. And the other big force is obviously the shape of the economic recovery. Is it a deep and prolonged downturn, or at the other end of the spectrum, do we have a more vibrant economic rebound? And so when you look at that, you have four quadrants, and we have four different scenarios. So that worst case scenario, we're calling the long goodbye. The second scenario is safe but hungry. The third we call the VIP economy. And the fourth we're calling inclusive abundance. So let me take you through those in a little more detail. And as I'm talking through them, it would be great if you could think about, well, what would we do under each scenario? What would our strategy be if this is how things played out? And what preparation do we need to do in case this scenario plays out rather than any other? The first scenario then, the long goodbye, this is, if you like, our worst case scenario, where the pandemic really doesn't disappear from the planet. While some countries get it under real control and effectively declare the end of it, others just keep rolling on. Right now, there are more than 10 countries where the number of infections are growing. We know that in the US, over half the states, are seeing a rise in infection rates. We're seeing it in different countries rising quite dramatically as well. And in this scenario, we don't see the pandemic really being eradicated for quite some time. We don't have an effective vaccine in this scenario until 2022, and the world isn't fully vaccinated till the end of 2023. This obviously has massive impacts on the economy, that every time we try and pull out, we have a stuttering restart and then we pull back in. So a lot of people talk about a W-shaped recovery, and we might see multiple little peaks at the bottom of the W. But each time we try and pull out, we end up pulling back. The people who come off furlough, some of them get made redundant because their businesses just don't have the demand we're expecting. Businesses in turn are cutting their budgets in this scenario because they're very nervous about future revenue. Those budget cuts have implications on their suppliers. And so this rolls on through 2021 into 2022. And it isn't until 2023 that we start to see a real economic recovery emerge. And we know that the airline industry is already talking about 2023 as being when it would be up at about 80% of what it was doing in 2019, and it would be calling that the new normal. So this is quite a fragile recovery when it happens, but it's not until we have the global focus on health that we really start to get that recovery, because that's when we can be confident to really push things forward. In the second scenario, this is where countries accept that they really have to trade off the economic recovery for really getting rid of the pandemic. And there's a very strong focus on eradicating it, not just in the developed economies, but putting the effort in and collaborating to make sure that the poorest and most fragile countries have a solid health infrastructure so they can eradicate it too. In this scenario, the hope is that we get the the vaccine by 2021, and that by the end of 2022, everyone has been vaccinated. So the recovery is still slow here, but when we come out more solidly, because we know that it's more sustainable. We know we're not going to go back into lockdowns and see peaks emerging in different parts of the world. So we come out slower, but more solid and more sustainable. The third scenario is one that a lot of people think their country is in now, where there's an acceptance that we just have to get on with trying to reboot the economy whilst the pandemic is still rife in our countries. And in this scenario, what we can see happening is you start to see effective physical distancing being affected, so that governments try and protect the wealth creators, the business owners, the people who work in those businesses. They're the first in line to get the testing, to get the vaccination. And there's physical distancing between them and the areas of this, towns and cities which have higher infection rates, who effectively get locked down or quarantined. And you're already seeing that happening in some countries. In this scenario, you start to see events happening more, people traveling more, but there's a nervousness. But it is starting to happen and the economy is picking up, but it's slow. It's more of that kind of Nike swoosh type recovery on the economy. And then the final scenario is where we get the kind of eradication of the pandemic that I talked about earlier in Safe but Hungry. But here there's a real focus on helping the poorest countries to get out of this, and the economic recovery is more solid, so more of a U-shaped recovery. And that's because governments start to tie furlough payments to retraining, so that people who do lose their jobs are being retrained to get back into new jobs. And also the bailout money being given to companies is tied to them investing in innovation, investing in improving their environmental performance, as has happened in France, where the government has said that Air France has to improve its environmental performance in order to get the money. But also a lot of investment in new job creation, new industries, and the retraining of people to move into those growth industries. So those are 4 different scenarios. It's not a case of picking the one you like best, as I said. It's about thinking about, well, what would we do under any of these scenarios? And you'll get a copy of the slides if you want them to remind yourself, and the paper that explains these in a little more detail. So let's go on and look at what this means. Well, the first thing is preparedness now becomes the order of the day. Whether we're individuals, organizations, or governments, I think many of us will have felt that we were caught unprepared for this crisis. We didn't really have our house in order to be able to deal with it effectively. We didn't have the answers as to how we would navigate through it. Governments in particular should have. They're supposed to do these preparedness exercises, but many didn't. And the ones who were least prepared are probably going to have the longest pandemics. The best prepared were able to really close it out very quickly. But critical to all of this is learning. So moving forward, what we know is that what's really going to enable us to come out of this solid, develop the new industries, drive new growth, create new travel demand, create new meetings demand, is learning. People individually and organizations and governments learning and putting a massive focus on acquiring new knowledge about where the opportunities are, acquiring new skills to help us respond, and acquiring more flexible and experimental approaches, because no one quite knows what's going to work in the environment we're in. And I think there are 5 key things that we all have to do. And then I'm going to go through sort of 10 strategies. But the first is about looking for gold. We all have to get really good now at looking around us, sniffing out the opportunities, really trying to understand in markets that might be depressed, where is the growth? Where are the segments that might be willing to spend money, or the businesses that might be willing to organize meetings? Looking around, trying to understand what are the sectors that are getting investment where they need to be vibrant and doing things, hosting some sort of trade events. So really getting clever about finding where the opportunities are in amongst all the noise, and using the internet, search, our networks, everything possible to help us spot where those little nuggets of gold might be. The second is really, getting the motivation to act, because there's a big difference between spotting the opportunity and going after it. And what I'm seeing right now is very different behaviors in organizations around doing something different. Most were very good at moving to remote working, but then when it comes to imagining other new possibilities, you see very different moves. I talked to an insurance company on Monday, or a pensions company, and they're so excited about the opportunities to really change what they do, change the way they're building their systems, rethink their product portfolio, and they see this as a golden opportunity to get on and do the kinds of things that they've been hesitating on for a couple of years. Last week, I talked to the IT directors and chief information officers of a whole bunch of universities and higher education institutions in the UK. And I was horrified at how negative some of them were, even though they know that they could lose, in some cases, 50% of their students and a huge chunk of their budgets. They were hugely unwilling to think about something different or try new experiments and try different ways of reaching students who they would never have attracted before electronically. They all were just hanging on to the belief that it would go back to physical delivery, even if they had to do it with 50% less students. They couldn't think beyond that. And the challenge for all of us is to surround ourselves and to make sure we're talking to the people who are really going to inspire us, give us ideas, give us encouragement. And rather than telling us all the reasons why that isn't possible, they're asking us, well, how are you going to learn about that? What's the next step? They're constantly asking us questions that encourage us to move forward. When we start to move forward, what we realize is that a lot of us knew very good dance routines for every situation possible. An economic downturn, we kind of knew how to navigate through it because things would come back quite quickly. A rapid growth in demand, we could deal with that. A problem at a venue, we could move an event. A problem with a group of travelers coming in, we knew how to satisfy them. But now everything is changing at the same time. We have no control over most of this, and we're having to learn to work, to market, to collaborate, to create new opportunities in very different ways. So we're having to learn new dance steps, and we're having to accept that we're not going to be perfect, and we're going to stumble when we get on the dance floor. We're going to trip over our feet. We're going to trip over our partner's feet. But unless we get out there and try, we're never going to learn the new routines. And then I think one of the exciting things here is the education that we need, the learning that we need is available for free pretty much everywhere. Right now, you can go to Harvard and take a huge number of courses, and the same with a number of universities for free. You only pay for the certificate. So there's absolutely no excuse for us not to be learning about the latest developments in technology or in new growth industries or in marketing. And we can take these courses at our own pace, and we can give up a course quickly if we don't like it or it's not right for us, but we can keep learning. The other thing is that in the world that's changing so quickly, we don't get all the knowledge we need from academic courses. Sometimes we need to go straight to the experts who know what's going on. So we might be hearing that in our area, there's a growth in the synthetic biology market, people creating new synthetic materials. Now, we really want to get to people in that industry to hear directly from them as to what's going on and how that works. And luckily now there are platforms like Quorio and others emerging where you can get direct access. The faculty are the people working in the industry who know what's going on. So you're really, instead of just being taught classroom lessons, you're having one-to-one conversations with the experts to ask the questions you need answered, which I think is an incredibly good way of accelerating our learning. The next is working out what is the space we want to play in. It's very easy to just follow the herd and see what others in the industry are doing and saying, well, we'll do what they're doing. Or to say, you know, what's the collective voice in our organization saying, and that might be based on naysaying voices or a reluctance to change. But here the me is, you know, us as an organization. How do we define our space? How do I as an individual help drive the organization to do this new experimentation, to try these different ideas? Because what we don't know is what's going to work. So we have to be willing to step out from the crowd and do things differently. And then finally, it's about how do we use our voice? How do we get heard around the experiments we're doing? So for example, if we're a convention center and we've decided that we don't think we're going to get many conventions for the next 6 months, and we decide to turn ourselves into a pop-up retailer, how do we get that out there? How do we get that message out there? How do we get the local media talking about us as a story? How do we get our staff talking to their friends and families, talking to their friends and families? How do we get the internet buzzing about us? How do we create the stories that really attract attention to us for the innovative things we're doing? So those are kind of 5 behaviors that I think are really important for us to think about. And then I just want to talk through what I see as 10 strategies to really help us move forward to unlock opportunity. And I realize we've got CVBs on the call, we've got destination marketing organizations, hotels, convention centers, event agencies, destination marketers, all sorts of players, and an industry association. So I'm trying to give everyone something here that could be useful. The first is, I think, collaboration. What's really important, I think, is that the experience a traveler is being offered, whether they're an individual traveler, a business traveler, or a convention visitor, that they can see that there's a consistency of experience. So ideally, from the point they leave home to the destination, the departure airport, the plane, the arrival airport, the transport from the airport to the hotel, the journey to the convention center, that they're seeing the same level of consistency around whether they're being tested or temperature checked, cleanliness. They're being told the same information about whether all the staff who serve them have had antibody tests or antigen tests, but they can really feel like there's a consistency and the industry bodies are working together. And I think this is a role that the CVBs in particular can play, both within a destination but across destinations, to try to build traveler confidence by showing that there is that experience there and that everyone is operating to similar standards. The second is about really securing the end-to-end solution, i.e. guaranteeing traveler safety. And that might sound crazy, but we're seeing it happen right now. So for example, Ras Al Khaimah is one of the Emirates in the United Arab Emirates. You're probably all aware of Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Ras Al Khaimah is one of the smaller ones, but it now has a very thriving travel business with visitors from Russia. And basically it's organized by a travel agency and a destination management organization in Russia. And what they're doing is basically all of the travelers who want to come have to be pre-tested to make sure when they book that they don't have coronavirus, but also at the point of departure, they're tested again to make sure they don't have it. And then the plane is only them, they're the only people on the flight. All the staff have been tested. When they arrive at the airport, they arrive at Ras Al Khaimah, they go through a dedicated space, and all the staff have been tested so that they know they're in a completely sealed and safe environment. At the hotel, exactly the same thing. They're not allowed out of the hotel. They've deliberately chosen to just stay at a resort hotel so they can have that experience. So it's effectively quarantine on arrival. If anyone does get infected during the stay, then they're quarantined again. If they want to go and visit anything, any of the attractions in Ras Al Khaimah, the attractions are closed and they're the only ones who go. It's organized so that they're the only ones who go. And I think we have to start thinking about that. And this is again where the CVBs, the hotels, the leisure operators, everyone can work together to say, how do we create these secure solutions so that people can travel to our destination? And if it's for a convention, And how do we apply that to the convention? And I know different states in the US are applying different rules. I read that Alaska's allowing meetings of up to 500, and then if you get approval, you can have bigger ones. That's quite a lot. But how do you ensure the security of everyone there, everyone serving the experience? And how do you avoid the bad PR of suddenly there being an outbreak because there are a couple of super spreaders at your event? So we've really got to think hard about how do we get the business moving again with very secure solutions that really assuage all of our travelers' doubts about coming. The third is taking away as much as possible of the opportunity for you to touch something that might transmit the virus. What you see on the screen is Bangalore Airport. The airline industry and the aviation industry was thinking that an entirely contactless journey through the airport from curb to cabin was about 2 years away. In January, the guys at Bangalore Airport in India could see what was happening with coronavirus, and they decided to accelerate their project. And using biometric technology and mobile phones and all the rest of it, they've now created this entirely contactless journey. So you don't have to hand over any paper, you don't have to touch any services, and you don't have to interact with any humans at any point in your journey through. You still do all the same security clearances, but they're basically saying, how do we do this? And we're seeing more and more hotels do this, where they're saying, okay, if you visit, you check yourself in, you do a temperature check when you get into the hotel, maybe you'll have a COVID-19 test, you'll carry your own luggage. When you order food, it's delivered to your room. But we're basically trying to minimize your contact with other human beings, and you'll have times in the pool where no one else is there, or there's only a few people, so we can do physical distancing in the pool or in the gym or any other facility. But really thinking about how do we give you that kind of contactless experience in whatever we're doing. The fourth is then people won't necessarily want to come and just stay in your hotel. They will want to explore the local destination. And so that's where we have to start to think about, well, how do we rethink what experiences we'll offer our travelers? Maybe they won't be allowed to venture out on their own because of the risks, or we will have to test them every time they go in and out. But maybe we start to do a lot of local partnerships. And you're seeing this now in Italy in places where the hotels are partnering with the tourist attractions, and they're agreeing set times where the guests from that hotel can travel in a secure transport to the location. They'll have their own time to visit the attraction, and then they'll come back, and then other people are allowed in. But it's all about finding the right partners so we can deepen the quality of your experience, but also make it really solid and secure, so that again we've got reasons to keep people coming. Sorry, one thing I forgot to say with voice is video has become really powerful now. Providing videos of what you're offering and how it all works, and showing not just the beautiful attractions in a location, but the security and the health measures in place to protect you. That's what's really worked for Bangalore Airport. It's got people coming there because they think it's a very safe airport to travel through, and it's because they've seen the video. The next is really, particularly when we're talking about business events, starting to think about, well, who do we want to target, and what's the safest way of doing this? Are we going to go for the mass events where there's a big risk and there's a lot of extra issues around security, around cleaning procedures? Or do we go for smaller events from the new well-funded industries that are coming through, the higher value meetings where they might only have 20 to 50 delegates? And this is where doing our research is important, because we know that all these sectors you see on the screen are receiving phenomenal amounts of investment. They are the next trillion-dollar industries. They're moving at speed, and they do have a need to connect, whether it's their management teams, whether it's them and their supplier base, it's them and their investors, them and their potential customers and partners. They want to be creating events. They want to be having their mini trade fairs. So starting to think about who is it we target that has the money, that's willing to pay for safe and secure experiences that we can deliver in a manageable way. So maybe not going for the 2,000 person event right now, but saying, can we do things in the 50 to 200 space that where we might be charging them a little more, but we're providing a really safe and secure experience for them. The next thing, I think this is something I'm slightly worried about within the industry, is a lot of people don't seem to have asked very many questions of their own insurers about what they're allowed to do and what happens if someone comes to your hotel or your venue and catches COVID and then brings a case against you. Or what are the insurance companies saying for individual travelers about what happens if they catch COVID while they're traveling? Or business insurers saying about businesses sending their people to a location or to an event. Now I know from talking to a number of businesses that their insurers have said, we won't cover you. If your staff go to a convention, pick up coronavirus, or there's an uncertainty about whether they've picked it up, we won't cover you. And so a lot of businesses, as you know, are putting these very strong travel policies in play that are saying don't travel. And we know that one of the reasons that IMEX North America was cancelled was that they were concerned that a lot of businesses still had no travel policies in place, and that there's a lot of uncertainty around what insurance will apply. So I think it's very important that you research what's going on with the insurance sector and what it's saying, and is there a way that you can maybe even come up with destination-based insurance policies with local insurers that allow people to buy COVID-19 insurance or some sort of protection. And this is, again, where collaboration across the industry might give you the scale to create new policies to fill the gap which traditional insurers won't play in. Then there's a big issue here about what do we do with our facilities if the travelers don't come back, or they don't come back in anywhere near the same volumes. And this is that worst case scenario. What do we do with our hotel? What do we do with our venue? Yes, we can hope for the best, but what if we don't fill it? What if we can't have conventions for some time? Well, I think there's a number of creative things we can do. We've seen some venues convert themselves into temporary hospitals around the world, which is obviously a great service and a way of generating some revenue. We've seen a lot of hotels being used to house essential workers. But there's a lot more we can do here. So, for example, around the world, a lot of schools are saying they can't do what governments are asking them to do around social distancing and have all their pupils come back to the classroom, because they can only have around a third of the pupils in the classroom if they have a 2 meter separation, or maybe half the pupils at a 1 meter separation. Well, this gives an ideal opportunity for hotels and venues to use some of their meeting space, to say, well, we can house the overflow. Similarly, when, for examinations, providing the space for doing that, universities have the same challenge. How do we use our facilities? One of the things we know is that a lot of retailers are going to give up when things open up again, or already are. But many of them are holding stock. Many of them still holding their passion to take their business forward. So one of the opportunities here is to hold pop-up markets or set up pop-up retail spaces where you have a one-way flow. You can effectively design in social distancing and allow those retailers to come in with their own pop-up stalls at a much lower cost than trying to hire a high street outlet to sell their offerings. There's all sorts of businesses now thinking about trading down from their current lease to a smaller office, but not sure what they're going to need in the long term. So again, there's the potential to let people effectively use our facilities as temporary workspaces. We'd already seen some hotels creating these live-work bedrooms where people could live in them long term, and they would have the office, on the floor, and raised above the office was a bed. We could see a lot more of that, and a lot more of businesses starting to do business from hotel rooms, where maybe I want to be a small manufacturer, 3D printing goods, or doing very small craft-based business. And instead of going to more expensive offices or other kind of places, I can have my own sealed unit inside a hotel, just using a bedroom, which no one else is going to be in. So I think that the challenge here is about being incredibly creative. The other opportunity here is around restaurants. We're already seeing that a lot of restaurants are closing their premises on the high street because they're saying that we're making a significant amount of money out of doing takeaway or home delivery, but not enough to justify the overheads of having a high street premises. where we can't take enough people in. So we're seeing the move to these offsite locations in warehouses, in factory units, and they're called ghost kitchens, where they're potentially sharing with 2 or 3 other restaurants or other chefs who've never had a restaurant to start with, who are basically doing home delivery, internet-based ordering, catering for functions, catering for events, but not having a physical frontage anymore. And so again, hotels to some extent, but convention centers could take some of their bigger convention spaces and start to provide facilities for this if you're not getting the events coming in. So it's about being really flexible and really imaginative about what are all the different ways we could repurpose our facilities to start to generate some revenue until we can have our conventions come back. And then maybe you have a really nice problem, which is more profitable for us in the long run, having these ghost kitchens for various restaurants or going back to doing conventions. So, it's a nice problem to have if you've got more demand than you have capacity. The next is about really trying to understand how the learning landscape is changing, because at some point we will go back to physical events, and then the hotels, venues will have to think about how do we compete with all the organizations now offering digital delivery of events. Our clients will have got very used to that over the next 8, 16, 24 months. So how do we compete? How do we know what the best of the experiences they can have online are? And then how do we show them what we can deliver for them with a combined digital and physical experience, a hybrid experience? And maybe that means that we start to get into that early. We start to partner with design agencies in a way we'd never thought of to help deliver some of these events, so we get the learning done. But we also start to think about, if we're a design agency in this space, if we're an event agency or a travel agency, what can we do to create learning experiences that we learn from, that we can maybe even monetize? And this is an interesting opportunity, I think, for convention and visitor bureaus and tourism bureaus, where, up until now, we've really thought that our job was to bring people to the physical destination. Some around the world have done a pretty good job at showing off their destination online and creating virtual tours, but maybe there's a whole other level where we start to create package programs where you can just learn about our destination. You can do history tours, you can do virtual reality experiences, and we start to monetize that in the same way as if someone came and did a walking tour of our city and paid for it. How do we start to create that next level of richer experience which we can monetize? And again, it's being open to ideas and open to experimentation. The ninth strategy is this, something I keep talking about here, which is about learning and experimentation. Are our staff learning? Are we as an organization learning? Are we looking in all of the places possible? Are we looking in places we never thought possible to find new ideas, to find new opportunities? And are we willing to experiment? So I've thrown out a whole bunch of ideas. If you're reading the industry press on a daily basis, you're seeing things that others are doing, different kinds of ways in which they're trying to adapt and evolve. And getting that mindset, that culture to say, can we keep learning, keep trying, keep experimenting, find something that works? And in a way, finding a way of silencing the voices that just want to say no, because it doesn't look like what we were doing back in January. Because no one knows what's going to work. We have to be willing to try, we have to be willing to experiment. And in order for what we're trying and what we're experimenting to work, we have to be learning. We have to be bringing in new ideas, new insights, new perspectives, maybe even new partners to help us try this stuff. And the final one is interesting, because during this period of the pandemic, we've seen the environment benefit. We've seen better air quality, lower emissions, better quality water, new wildlife appearing. Some might tell you that we've seen dolphins in the canals of Venice. Who knows if that's true or not? But we've certainly seen nature kind of reclaim its space a little bit. And there's a sense that people don't want to go back. They don't want to go back to feeling that we're damaging the environment. But clearly there is a cost involved. But at some point, people will start coming back. And I think in that 2-year period, or 12 months to 2-year period, before we start to get back to what might feel like normal, those businesses, whether they're sending business travelers or convention travelers, And individuals are going to have a heightened awareness of sustainability issues, and they'll be expecting destinations, hotels, venues, leisure facilities to be demonstrating enhanced sustainability. So now is also a good time to be thinking about how do we find which of these sustainable development goals from the UN are ones that we can make an impact on, and how do we build them into our proposition? How do we find smarter ways of improving our environmental footprint, educating people who perhaps didn't have the skills to work in the sector before, but enabling them to come in later on? You know, what are the things we can do to really create a more sustainable future? So hopefully that's made sense. And as a reminder, you know, I started by saying there are three critical challenges, you know, preparing for those different scenarios that I talked about, thinking about what our strategy would be under any one of those scenarios, what tactics might we try, and what should we be doing now to start experimenting for that. Most of us prefer preparing for the upside scenarios, but I think now is the time to also be really thinking about that worst case scenario of the pandemic not being eradicated for 2 or 3 years and the downturn lasting for 2 or 3 years, because we really don't know. We're in uncharted territory. The second is, you know, some of these shifts we're talking about in terms of behavior, whether it's retailers closing down or businesses moving to online events or travelers wanting a more sustainable experience or a more secure experience. How can we start to anticipate that? What are we reading? What are we learning about? What webinars are we tapping into to learn about this, so that we can anticipate, you know, understand the changes and then work out how we might respond, so we can be ahead of the curve and demonstrate in solutions we're creating and the videos about those solutions that we're ahead of what the market wants, or with what the market wants, and we've thought it through and we have a solution. And finally, you know, a lot of the things I've talked about really are central to this idea of being more flexible, being more adaptable, and being willing to experiment, and developing those as core organizational capabilities, but also core skills in individuals. Because again, we know people in the industry are losing their jobs, or across all the sectors are losing their jobs. But if we've got these skills, if we have these things, it's going to make us more employable. It's going to make us stand out if we can demonstrate that we can collaborate, we can solve problems, we can think laterally, we're willing to experiment. It gives us that edge in the marketplace. So whether from our organization or our own benefit, I think these become absolutely critical. So, you know, my conclusion here is, you know, as I say, we've had these dance routines that we've all mastered. This is an industry that is brilliant at responding to all sorts of issues, but we've been hit now with a double whammy of an economic crisis driven by a medical crisis where we have no control over how that medical crisis plays out. And so we're really having to learn very different dance steps, and we're really having to develop the courage to go out and start dancing before we know everything, and be willing to fall over our steps, trip over our partners, and be slightly embarrassed because it didn't quite work, but knowing that we're definitely not going to succeed if we don't get off the chair and up on the dance floor. So I hope that's made sense. I hope that's given you some food for thought. As mentioned, you can have a copy of the slides if you email me. We're also writing this paper that sort of goes into more detail on a lot of the strategies we've talked about for different parts of the industry, and it explains the scenarios in more detail. And also we have a regular newsletter which really talks about a whole range of ideas of what's changing and possibilities and how to adapt to them and how to respond to them. It's normally $149, but we agreed with Susan that as a gesture of kind of goodwill to the industry, knowing the kind of the issues we're all facing, we're happy to let you have a subscription to that for 1 year for free. You just go onto the website, select the newsletter from the store, and then enter that coupon code RTNews at checkout, and you'll be given a free subscription, and then you'll start receiving copies of the newsletter from next week, I guess. So thank you very much. I'm going to put my webcam back on so that you can now see my face, and I am going to open up to Susan to start asking some questions.
Wonderful, Rohit. Thank you so much. Fabulous session, fabulous program. Really appreciate all the information that you're providing to us. For anybody that joined us late, we do our questions one of two ways. You type your question in the question area and I read those out to Rohit. Alternatively, if you'd like to speak directly to Rohit, just click on the little hand symbol on your control panel. It lights up on my screen and lets me know that you want me to unmute you. I'll call you by your first name and unmute you. You talk away to Rohit, get your question answered. Everybody can hear the question, everybody can hear the answer. And once your question's been answered to your satisfaction, I'll then mute you again and we'll go on to the next question. And just make sure that you also register and attend next week, Marketing in a Crisis. So that promises to be a great webinar as well. So let's get into our questions. The first question is, do you have any stats on how many people are comfortable with and willing to fly and also attend conferences?
The numbers are changing all the time. I haven't seen any recently. I think the last figures I saw were about 2 weeks ago. It varies by market, but globally it averages out at about a third who say they might be willing to fly within the next few months.
Okay.
In terms of attend conferences, that's different. Individuals might be saying they're willing to attend, but the number of businesses that are willing to send their people to conferences is very low. I don't know the actual numbers.
Okay. The next one is, we're a convention center. How much time do you think we should be looking at new markets and opportunities? Basically, how long do you think it will be before it's business as usual?
I think we've got to get rid of this notion of business as usual. I think it's a continuously evolving picture, and it's going to be business as it is this week, this month, this fortnight. I really don't think we should be talking about the new normal or any kind of return to stability 2 or 3 years. I think it's going to be very volatile. The airline industry are giving us their lead where they're saying 2023. I think, and then they're saying that might be 80% of what they were doing in 2019. It's so uncertain. It's hugely dependent on whether we get a vaccine. The faster we get a vaccine, the faster everything changes. Right now, lots of promising trials, but they're only that. They're promising, then they're a long way off being deliverable to the marketplace. So I think you've got to expect real volatility until at least the end of next year, and be thinking really hard about what can we do to drive revenues into our convention center in that period, and working on that worst case scenario, saying, what if we didn't have any convention bookings for the whole of next year? And if we knew that now, what would we do? And then you can go out and start working on some of that stuff. I gave some examples. And then if the conventions do come back, great, then you don't give away as much of the space to these other activities. But what it means is you've got something to keep you ticking over and keep employing people while you're waiting for the events business to recover.
Okay, great. Next question, is your latest book available online?
Yes, you can buy it from our website, fastfuture.com. You can also buy it from Amazon.
Great. Next question. Do you think people will be willing to pay to attend a virtual travel conference?
There's so many events right now that you've really got to have something special about your event, whether that's the speakers that they can't hear anywhere else for free, or the things you're going to be doing at your event that are unique, the design of the experience that's going to be unique, that might lead people to want to pay. And we do see some people succeeding with payment. We've experimented. We've run a whole series of webinars ourselves. We've experimented with payment. It was an interesting experiment, but I'm not going to retire on the revenues. But what we found works is sponsorship. That if you can not guarantee, but if you can demonstrate that you're pulling in large numbers to your events, and we could demonstrate that we were getting 700 plus registrations and 500 plus attendees, that was then a big selling point to sponsors who put up a reasonable amount of cash, which meant that we were able to run a whole series of events and allow people to attend for free. So you've got to be creative in the business models. You've got to be creative in your thinking about how we experiment and what do we do. there's an incredible array of experiences available now. There's over 100 different tools for delivering events online. There's some incredible tools now for creating very rich engagement online. So allowing different people to share ideas, build different perspectives, appreciate different perspectives, and get to decisions, not necessarily consensus, but get to decisions that are better informed. And so we can see that online we're starting to be able to do some of the things that we could do at physical events. But it's all about the design, the experience, the content that you're providing. I've seen some events do quite well charging and just holding their ground and saying, no, if you want to come to this thing, you do have to charge. And so, you know, it's all about experimenting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Have you seen any of these, you know, virtual conferences? Do people, are they willing to sit for, you know, 6 hours in a day, or do they spread them out over a week? How does that work?
So we're seeing everything in the spectrum. We're seeing some conferences where they're literally 1 hour every morning, and that's it. And then, you know, so these events, I think Richmond events, so people know about them. They used to kind of go to the whole event, and you would do a mixture of learning and then one-to-one meetings with the exhibitors. And now what they're saying is you can attend the event for free, but in return for the free event attendance, you have to talk to a couple of exhibitors each day, you know, again, virtually. We've seen others. So there's an event running right now called the Recovery Summit that started on Monday, 80 plus speakers. It's going from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day, back-to-back speakers all day long. And it's free, but they got 7,000 registrations. It's run by a speaker bureau. I was quite lucky that I was one of the opening speeches on Monday, because I think people might have got fatigued by the end of it, but they do have people who are watching the whole thing. And you know, you're getting huge numbers turning up to the session. So I know 2,500 registered for my session, 1,500 turned up. And, you know, I know other people who've had 2,000 at their sessions. So they're working, and some people are really giving themselves time to absorb a lot of content over the course of this week. Others are saying, well, I'm just going to dip in and out afterwards to the most popular sessions or the sessions that most appeal to me. So we're seeing hugely huge variation in formats. There isn't one that obviously works, but I don't think many people are going to get away with delivering 2 or 3 day, all-day conferences, because people do get webinar fatigue. Looking at the screen all day long is quite tiring. We need a break. It's different than being in meeting rooms. So we've got to come up with more interesting designs. And we're seeing people bringing in some of those virtual environments like Second Life, where you can literally walk around and talk to people and meet people and travel to different worlds and different islands and, you know, do different things as you travel around. And I think we'll see that kind of thing developing as well. But so richer and richer experiences. And now there's demand for it. A lot of the developers are really accelerating their product offerings. And a lot of the people who are creating gaming environments where you already can do all of that are now porting that across to make it available for the conferences, exhibitions, and events environment.
Right. Interesting. And I know that the person that asked the question about would people be willing to pay to attend a travel conference, it's a group, it's an industry association that has a tourism conference, and likely the revenue from that conference would be a significant revenue for the running of the tourism association. And
Right.
So if they do charge, you know, they can likely still get the sponsorship. They can also charge a little less because they don't need to pay for meals. They don't need to pay for coffee. They don't need to pay for a number of the things that they would ordinarily have had to pay for.
So, I mean, there are different models here. And the problem is that in this sector at the moment, everyone you're targeting has also been battered. You know, people are losing their jobs. We've just seen Hilton, you know, laying off a couple of thousand people. Most of the hotel groups, the airline groups, convention centers are laying off people. Everyone, you know, destination management agencies, everyone is losing staff. Everyone is, you know, suffering a hit on revenues. And so the question, if we're an industry association, is how best do we support our members? And is there a way through sponsorships or giving, instead of having exhibitions, we have little exhibitor slots where they're adding real value, you know, through information, that in between the normal content, we're interspersing exhibitor slots and we're charging for those. And maybe we have a lot more little slots where we charge a small amount to a lot of exhibitors, and people who want to break into the industry and want visibility might be able to do, willing to do that. And people who are in it for the long run know that they want to support the industry. So there's a whole range of ways that you can fund it. And then maybe, you know, if you still have to charge, you just charge a lot less to members as a thank you for their loyalty, but in the hope that, you know, they'll come back later on. That, you know, there's a real challenge for the people running events for the most heavily hit sectors, because they've got a double problem: A, the reluctance to travel, but B, the sector itself is badly hit.
Sure, sure. We're down to the last two questions, so if anybody has anything that they'd like to have Rohit answer, please get it in. Anne, I'm going to unmute you. There you go, Anne, you're unmuted.
Yes, hi, Ann Edwards here from Halifax. Just a quick question. I was going around talking to some businesses. I live in Halifax, and we have like 200 businesses and restaurants. And what's happening is that they are open, but they're not open because people aren't coming in. They're scared to come into the actual physical building. I had suggested maybe what they could do is go live on a video, and then the person doing the video could walk around and sort of say, you know, they have the distancing, they have the table space, they have the patio distance, and different things like that. What strategies or tips could you recommend right away for businesses that are struggling to pay their rent?
You know, that's where going online to sell takeout, if you're a restaurant, is one thing, so that people don't have to come to the physical location. Because I think there is a nervousness. While some people are willing to go, others aren't. I think doing the video, maybe grouping together as a collection of traders to pay for it, or even a handmade video to start off with, which you just get up online. Obviously, everyone's doing the deep discounting, but, you know, loyalty rewards. Starting to think about what's a loyalty program that if you come back and service us in the community, we'll do something for you. And, you know, for some, getting out of your premises and just saying, we're only going to do takeout and we're going to do it from someone else's restaurant. We're going to share the kitchen, or we're going to move, you know, to cooking from, you know, a different location. But I think everyone is looking now for different ways of doing things. This is where I think schools, if they had a little bit more kind of commercial freedom, could say, well, you could use our kitchens for most of the day, pay us a rental, you could cook and then service your takeout orders. This is where we all have to be really flexible around the way we use our facilities and thinking differently. But, you know, ultimately, you only survive as a business if you can get revenue coming in the door. So you got to think about clever ways of driving revenue to you and raising people's awareness that you can offer a safe experience, whether it's in your restaurant or through your takeout offering.
Okay, and what would happen now? They're coming up with an app, the government just announced, where you can download the app and then they can see where you've been, so that if a breakout happens, they're able to track those particular persons. I go into a restaurant, I download my app, they know where I am, and then I find out this restaurant has been compromised. Is there any liabilities of the restaurant, the fact that now they're opening up and they're having people in, and there's a lot more vulnerability to this situation?
I don't know how the particular app that you're in your location is going to work, but I know in the UK, the app they were talking about, and they've basically just given up on it, wasn't going to tell you that, you know, if you went into this restaurant, whether there had been an incident there, but it would say to you, you know, you've been in contact with someone who had COVID-19, you need to self-isolate, and then you need to tell us who you've been in contact with. The problem is that people are very reluctant to tell you who they've been in contact with, and then they're very reluctant to self-isolate if they think they're going to lose 14 days pay. And so there are some flaws in the system. It's worked really, really well in places like Taiwan and Singapore, where the population have just got it that, you know, actually the quicker we get this done, the quicker we get over it and the quicker we get through it. But where it's stretching out, like in the UK and in the US and places, people are a little fatigued already. And I think there'll be a hesitancy about using these apps. And I would be very nervous if I was a business, if people could track that there had been someone with COVID-19 in my restaurant. I would be very hesitant, and, you know, for all the reasons you say, and you know, I'd imagine the government would be open to all sorts of lawsuits for loss of business if it did that.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to mute you again, Anne. Okay, and the last question, unless someone gets one in real quick, is don't you think insurance is going to be critical? If they don't have confidence that we'll be safe, should we?
Well, that's why I put it as one of my 10 strategies, is research what's going on in insurance, because the insurers aren't speaking with one voice. Different insurers seem to be taking slightly different attitudes around this. So that's why you need to be investigating, but you certainly need to be investigating whether insurers will let individuals travel to places where they think they might get infected, or what their policy will be about you getting infection, whether they'll let businesses send people to somewhere, you know, where they risk getting infection, and particularly to conventions. I think you need to really be asking that question and being very clear. And if a business is talking to you about coming for a convention or an association, check with them what their insurers are saying. You know, what's the policy? Because the last thing you want is to say yes and then discover that the insurers say no. Right.
Okay. That brings us to the end of our questions, the end of our program. Rohit, thanks ever so much for doing this for us. I know it's getting a little late in London, but really appreciate you being here. Fantastic content. Everybody that's on the call, make sure that you take down the email address, rohit@fastfuture.com. Take advantage of his offer to provide the slides and also the one-year newsletter. So thank you so much. So write down that coupon code RTNews for the free newsletter. And hopefully you'll join us next week, Marketing in a Crisis. Thanks so much, Rohit. Really appreciate it.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you all. I hope I wish you all success in navigating the coming period of turbulence.
Stay safe, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.